When I went to Australia, it wasn't just for adventure, even though my previous videos might suggest that. No, I was there to do research, and that's the topic of today's video. So grab some Bundaberg with Vegemite toast, cause we're going down under again. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands where I carried out this research and pay my respects to elders past and present. So, between 2022 and 2023, I joined the University of Melbourne for a research internship in forest ecology. My focus was the forests of Victoria's Central Highlands, a region shaped by fire, logging, and some of the tallest trees in the world, the mountain ash. So these forests face two major challenges: wildfires, which are becoming more intense with climate change, and logging, which clears entire areas before burning and replanting them. Both practices remove not only the big trees, but also the smaller, less studied species that grow beneath them. And one of those understory species is the tree geebung, or Persoonia arborea, a rare tree found only in this region. Early work suggested that this tree can live for centuries. The plant produces bitter green fruits that wallabies love, and might even survive some fire. Oddly enough, it also likes to grow on soils that were heavily disturbed by logging, and despite all these quirks, we still actually know very little about it. Because it's listed as threatened, there are now special laws for the species. Laws that are based on life history characteristics like age and maturity, but here's the problem. No one knows at what age a Persoonia is mature or how it responds to disturbance. So, my research set out to answer some basic but crucial questions. Namely, how old can these trees really get? When do they start producing fruit? And how do fire and logging affect their survival? By filling in these gaps, we can figure out whether current protections are enough and how to better conserve this mysterious species. To study Persoonia, I started with survey records collected by Vic Forest, the agency formerly in charge of logging in Victoria. These surveys mapped where Persoonia had been found inside small areas of forest called coops, basically patches of land set aside for potential harvesting. But location wasn't enough. I needed to know the history of each coop, like when it was last burned or last logged. Using fire and logging maps from the government, I created a disturbance footprint for each coop, summarizing the major events that shaped the area. For example, one coop might have been burned in 1939, while another was logged in the 1970s, and then burned again in 2009. Usually the most recent disturbance has the biggest impact on the trees we see today, but it can depend on how destructive the last disturbance was. From there, I selected 21 coops that best represent the different scenarios, some shaped by wildfire, some by logging, some by both. And then I visited each coop to study the Persoonia population, recording their size, fruit production, and how they responded to past disturbances. And so, I went on a 1-month fieldwork campaign through the Victorian Central Highlands on the hunt for tree geebung. The adventure kicked off at Bluey Creek Track. So according to my data, Bluey Creek Track was last burned in the 1983 wildfire, and after that it was never logged. And you can tell by just walking through here and just seeing the forest that this is definitely some intact forest. I already even cut myself on some wiregrass. Records don't always match reality. We found traces of old machinery that hadn't been documented, yet Persoonia was thriving. From fruiting adults to fresh seedlings, even a tree broken in half had managed to reproduce. This is also where I realized just how valuable my field assistant Ben was. While I struggled through dense prickly shrubs, he just marched straight through like it was nothing and always knew the way back. That night I stayed in the shack to rest up for the next day. The next morning we visited a coop nearby with a very different history. Sup up above us. Today I'm in the coop Dragon Ball Z. Yeah, I know, I didn't make these names up myself. So unlike Bluey Creek Track where we were yesterday, Dragon Ball Z was actually harvested, and in addition, it also had a regeneration burn in 2020, so we're not expecting to see many Persoonias. Case in point, we're now actually supposed to stand near a Persoonia that's about 4 meters tall. Needless to say, it's nowhere to be found. But what we did find is that this Persoonia probably managed to leave a couple of seedlings that must have come up after the regeneration fire. Because remember, Persoonia arborea is an obligate seeder. As a refresher, there are generally two ways plants can respond to fire. Some plants are resprouters, which can survive a fire and, of course, resprout from special organs. Most plants, however, are obligate seeders, which means they usually die after a fire and must come up from seed afterwards. So that's what Persoonia does. Much of the coop felt barren with compacted bulldozer tracks, but we still stumbled on a few surprises, like a single flowering Persoonia, which was the only one we found in the whole campaign, and a patch with nearly 100 seedlings all clustered together. After finishing our measurements, we stopped for lunch at the highest point in the coop. The view was incredible, despite the heavy disturbance. Then it was on to the next site. So our next coop is actually not as much as a coop as it's just a road. This is Smythe Creek Road. And it appears that Persoonia grows along roads quite often, and today we're trying to find out why that is. We found plenty of them along the roadside, including one of the tallest Persoonia of the entire campaign at nearly 20 meters high. In case you're wondering, we used this device which calculates tree height using a laser. After recording our measurements, Ben led me to something unexpected nearby. So hidden in the forest was a huge sawdust pile from a sawmill that operated here back in the 1930s. Almost 90 years later, the piles are still there. Just a reminder of how much this landscape has changed. Ben drove me back, and the following day we went deep into the forest. Oh yeah, I remember when we were in Mozambique. This coupe, named after an Australian airline, is possibly the most remote of the entire trip, so thank God for Ben. So although records said that this area last burned in 1983, the forest told a completely different story. In the deep gullies, some so steep we had to walk across fallen trees, we found old growth patches which housed the tallest Persoonia of the entire campaign. It's a clear reminder that local geography matters and that history maps alone don't capture the full story. After a sunny weekend, we resumed the campaign in a misty forest. So this is Christian Road South, and according to my data, the last disturbance should have been the 1939 wildfire. But we just went through it and we saw some signs of harvesting in the area. So as you'll see, the reality is usually different from what you expect. Along an old logging road, we found many Persoonias marked with ribbons for the first time. Just like at Bluey Creek Track, gaps in harvesting records can give a misleading picture of the forest, because these trees were definitely not from 1939. So this is Christian Road North, and a minute ago it literally came falling from the heavens. So according to my data, this should have been logged somewhere in the 70s, and lo and behold, an old logging track. And surprise, surprise, there are so many Persoonias over here. This road is lined with Persoonias of similar age as the one before, which makes me think that the harvesting here must have spilled into the other coupe. Just strange how it wasn't recorded for that one. After we were done, Ben drove me to a new cozy place to stay, complete with some adorable bedroom posters. So today's coupes are threefold, and they're called Eastwatch, Pike and Harlow. So I guess forestry people really are into Game of Thrones. Anyway, these coupes are supposed to have been harvested in the 1980s, so we're expecting to find many old logging roads and, of course, many Persoonias as well. And this was only partly true. We did find enough Persoonias, 25 across 3 coupes, some bearing fruit, but they were really tricky to locate. You see, most of the forest was like super dense with understory, making the search very challenging. But there was something else we found plenty of actually. So we found many old logging roads and many Persoonia as well, but what we also found in the Eastwatch coupe, lots of snakes. Yeah, so funny story, I remember Ben walking up a roadside towards a Persoonia to do some measurements there, right? So when he turned to come back, he stopped dead in his tracks, like he froze. There was a snake lying right where he just walked, just chilling there. But we saw even more animals that day. Last coupe of the day. Lone Ranger stinging. Kimo Sabe. Supposedly logged in the 90s, we looked at the map and the Persoonias were all just lined up like that. So we were wondering, hey, could that be a road? Well, guess what? An old logging road. Well, I'm guessing at this point you get the idea. The age of Persoonia seemed consistent with the logging data. I'm just figuring out how to explain that logging might actually be necessary for Persoonia to grow. I really hope that's not going to be my conclusion from this all. Well, anyway, remember that I said I saw more animals? Oh my god, you guys, we just saw a wedge-tailed eagle. I'm 100% certain of it. It was huge and it had a distinctive tail. The wedge-tailed eagle is basically like the white-tailed eagle in Europe and the bald eagle in the United States. It's the largest bird of prey on the Australian continent. Unfortunately, I didn't capture it on tape, but to get an idea, this is what it would look like. Anyway, here's what I did capture on tape. It's a brush-tailed possum! They're fairly common, but it was surprising to spot one during the day because they're nocturnal. Australians know them well. In cities they play a similar role as raccoons in North America. In this picture you can clearly see their brush-shaped tail. Pretty good day to be honest. The next day Ben drove me out from Melbourne in the pouring rain. And it got pouring when we arrived. Not only is rain cold and annoying, but over here it's also dangerous because sometimes you gotta walk over fallen logs which become dangerously slippery when wet. Not to mention, the rain makes the leeches come out, cause yes, you have those in Australia. Because of course you do. And yes, I did get tagged a couple of times. Because of course I did. So this next site is called Opposite Footsies. The data says it was logged in 2016 but never burned, and that matches what we see, because without the overstory to block the sunlight and without fire to clear the understory, the shrubs here took over, which is why we expect to find young Persoonia here. Also typical Melbourne weather to just clear up out of nowhere. Our expectations were right, by the way. We found many younger Persoonia trees that must have come up after the harvest, as well as one really interesting individual.
Alright, so this is very cool, guys. We are at a place where we thought we saw a lot of seedlings like this one, but it actually turned out not to be a seedling. This is actually a fallen Persoonia which was pushed over that has started to resprout right over there. That's fascinating, right?
Okay, so rectification. My supervisor investigated this particular tree and found out it wasn't actually resprouting. Instead, it was just a tree that fell down, survived, and started branching again towards the light, which is still as amazing if you ask me. The next field day, Ben once again drove me from Melbourne to the next site.
Our luck had to run out sooner or later. We've had some luck over the weekends, especially with St. Kilda, but now the weather is looking terrible for the whole week. So this scoop is called Even Steven, and funnily enough, even though it was harvested, they actually managed to retain some of the Persoonia around here.
Mature Persoonia are protected by law only since recently, so that's why I thought it's pretty interesting to see that the foresters already applied that law here. So we found many trees with fruit. We even found multiple Persoonias that were over 20 meters tall. One of them was so far down the ash pile we couldn't reach it. We also found a lot of seedlings which must have come up after the harvest. Didn't take long to find enough trees, so we headed to the next coop for an early lunch. There we found some interesting things that Ben likes to call bogan paraphernalia. Basically, stuff that certain Australians leave behind. You know, like used shotgun cases, targets, and broken ceramics. Anyway, the next scoop, just a short walk from where we ate, was full of Persoonia along the roadside. So we were able to wrap things up pretty quick. Which actually really turned out in our favor too.
Alright, so this one's called Columbus Road, and we were just about done, and just in time because there's a real storm incoming.
Yeah, after our last measurement we headed straight for the car and got out of there. The weather would last until late in the night, but thankfully we were safe and sound in the shed. The next morning we had to drive way uphill to reach our next destination.
So this one's called Jumping Jack Flash, a coop that was harvested and then burnt. And we haven't seen many Persoonias yet. Maybe they were killed by the fire, or maybe there's just not really a prolific seed bank. Well, guess we'll find out.
Interestingly, we found Persoonia in different age groups, so the youngest seedlings grew on open logging tracks, while older trees survived in dense, sheltered spots. In burned areas, we found a wave of medium-sized seedlings that probably came up after the regeneration fire. Goes to show again how local geography tells a better story than a data file, right? Also, more bogan paraphernalia.
Bogans. So this here is East Beanuck Road, and if you look behind me you can see some slash piles that are lined up into rows, almost as if they wanted to plant something here.
The slash is the woody debris that is left after harvesting. Here they pile it up together because they want to burn it afterwards and create the fertile soil for the next generation of plants. Just like the previous site, it was harvested quite recently. So here's the thing, this coop was on a steep incline and we had to go all the way down for some measurements. But then it started raining. Again. And since it wouldn't stop, we had to climb our way back to the car.
Oh, you guys remember the slash piles lined up in a row? Man, they've now become an obstacle course. Oh my god.
Well, at least they weren't on fire, right? After drying off in the shack, Ben brought me back to the bush the next day.
Last scoop of the week, Bullock Creek Road, in the 2009 fire zone and harvested somewhere around 2019. We haven't found many Persoonia yet, and we think it's because most of the mature individuals were killed in the fire and didn't leave too big of a seed bank.
While we were right about the lack of Persoonia, this coop also tells another story. See, the harvesters bulldozed their way through this coop, leaving wide tracks that we call snig tracks. Persoonia grew massively on those. They then burnt the coop to regenerate the forest, but because few plants grew on the snig tracks, either the fire couldn't reach the Persoonia or there wasn't enough fuel to cause a destructive fire there, and that's why those ones survived. Some other observations here, we saw gang cactus, a Persoonia that grew around a log, more bogan paraphernalia, and a huge tree lying in our way. This is our last field day! And we were headed out to Dum Dum Road, a coupe that was hit in the 2009 fires. And this was clearly visible. We saw many older Persoonia trees bearing huge fire scars. Pretty groundbreaking stuff. It was always assumed that Persoonia is an obligate cedar that doesn't survive fire. But it looks like a light fire might be okay. We had lunch near Dum Dum Road. We were talking about what a privilege it was to be working in a place like this. Ben said something along the lines of, you know, sometimes the work is heavy and you wish the day just end, but also I get paid to be in this beautiful place. And you know what? Those words really stuck with me, and they'll probably stick with me for life.
Our last official coupe, guys. This is Sylvia Creek Road, and as you just maybe heard, we've been hearing some gunshots in the background. Or we're actually not sure what they are, but they do sound like gunshots. Bogans?
Fun fact, Silva is Latin for forest, so the name Sylvia basically means from the forest, which is very fitting. Unlike Dum Dum earlier, this coupe wasn't affected by the fire, so it actually also looks more like what you'd expect from a forest here. Thankfully, the harvesters put ribbons around the Persoonia, which really helped in finding them, because with the shots we heard in the distance, trust me, we didn't want to stay any longer than we had to. And just like that, our 1 month field adventure was finished. Now, it's back to campus to crunch data and fetch some answers. Let's summarize the most important things we learned from this field trip. Number 1. Persoonia seems to respond to disturbance. We saw lots of them along old logging roads. Fires killed many older trees, but also seemed to trigger waves of seedlings. And when logging and fire happened together, the patterns got even more mixed. Number 2. Most had fruits, almost none had flowers. About 60% of trees taller than 4 meters were fruiting, but we only found one single tree in flower. Number 3. Persoonia can survive fire. We have proof of this. Remember, we came across many living trees bearing huge fire scars. Number 4. Local geography is important. Maps treat each coupe as one unit where the same disturbance happened everywhere, but as you saw, this is often not true. Gullies and peaks are more sheltered from fire, and harvesters often didn't clear the entire area, so it's not a one-size-fits-all story. And finally, number 5, the records weren't always right. More than once we found signs of logging in places where the official data said that there was none. Quite strange. Now, let's use that information to answer our research questions. Question number 1. How old can these trees really get? Tree age can sometimes be estimated from its diameter and height, although this relationship is not straightforward. My supervisor built a formula showing how both traits relate to age, using radiocarbon dating of Persoonia samples and also trying to determine them by counting tree rings. With those formulas, we estimated that the tallest tree we found in the field was about 75 years old. Does this mean Persoonia can only live 75 years? No, not at all. That's just the oldest tree we could age. See, we have samples of larger trees, which were probably older too, but we couldn't date them because all of them had rot in the middle, right? That means we can't count rings, but also that we can't use the oldest part of the wood for radiocarbon dating. So we estimated our largest tree by how fast Persoonia can grow at most, and found it could be 130 years old max. Besides that, every coupe we studied had been touched by the huge Black Friday fires of 1939, 83 years before my research, meaning it was nearly impossible for us to find older trees anyway. Still, since local geography can shield some patches from fire, there could be Persoonia out there that are older, we just didn't happen to find them. So for now, all we can say is that they reach at least 75 years, and probably a bit, but not a lot more. Question number 2. When did they start producing fruit? So before answering this question, it's worth asking why it matters. So by law, mature Persoonia must be protected wherever possible. But what does mature actually mean? Plant scientists don't fully agree on this. So for my study, I used the biological definition, which is a tree is mature once it can reproduce. In plants, that usually means producing flowers or fruit. With Persoonia, flowers aren't always reliable since they can be infertile and harder to see. Fruit, on the other hand, shows the tree is producing seeds, which, if viable, can become new plants. So we use that as our marker. We're not there yet though. Even within the same species, not every tree matures at the same pace, so it would be wrong to take the youngest fruiting tree and just call that the age of maturity. Instead, we looked at the age when about half of them had fruit, and that turned out to be around 15 years. That doesn't mean that younger trees can't fruit, just that by age 15 the odds would be 50-50. Although this doesn't fully answer the original question, it's still valuable for management. By tracking which trees are fruiting, we can estimate how mature the population is. But to manage them well, we'd need a separate study to find out what maturity rate is needed to sustain a population of Persoonia. That's outside the scope of my research, but maybe fruitful for later? Question number 3. How do fire and logging affect their survival? This is probably the hardest question to answer since there are so many ways to look at it. I focused on how Persoonia germinates after fire and logging rather than whether the trees can physically survive these disturbances. I will shortly comment on that last part though. In terms of logging, if a harvester wants a tree gone, it's gone. There's no worry around that. Persoonia has shown some rare cases of resilience like that fallen tree we saw alive, but those are exceptions. Fire is different. Persoonia doesn't have traits that show it can survive fire, but we still found trees marked with heavy fire scars. So after looking into it, I learned that this site was only lightly burned in the 2009 fires, which maybe explains how they survived. So for the time being, my supervisor will use some of the data that I collected to demonstrate Persoonia can survive light fires, but not heavy fires. But to fully understand the whole story, we need to have a dedicated study on how Persoonia handles different fire regimes. What we did find is that Persoonia clearly responds to disturbance. After logging, we see a strong flush of new trees, like at Sylvia Creek, where most Persoonia came up right after the second harvest in the early 90s. And fire shows a similar pattern. At Dum Dum Road, the 2009 fires triggered a big wave of seedlings, and it's not just those sites, the same trend appeared across multiple coops, whether after fire or logging or even both. Each disturbance left a clear signature in the age structure of the trees that we found. It's worth noting though, the method we use to estimate Persoonia age isn't exact, so each tree's age could be about 7 years older or younger than we calculated, so the peaks we see might not match disturbance events perfectly. Take for example Pike and Columbus Road, where the peak is slightly off from where we expected. Another thing that opposite Fitzies demonstrate well is that the model is not so reliable for younger trees, which makes sense. For a younger tree the difference of 7 years is massive, while for an older tree not as much. And remember, some logging we saw in the field wasn't recorded in the official data. Take Christian Road, there's a clear Persoonia spike in the early 80s which could correspond with harvesting activity since we saw old logging roads and even a cut stump that suggests it should have happened there, but without records we can't say for sure. Oh, by the way, when I compared Persoonia's response to logging versus fire, logging seemed to trigger about 50% more seedlings than fire. Keep in mind though, this comes from a small sample in natural field conditions, so a controlled study would be ideal, but that's beyond the scope of our project. So that's my research on Persoonia. Before wrapping up, I want to leave you with a key takeaway from my research. So, we know Persoonia can live at least 75 years. Now let's imagine the forest naturally burns once every 75 years. If Persoonia needs about 15 years, so 50% maturity, to build up a big enough seed bank to sustain itself, that gives it plenty of time under normal conditions. But then comes human impact. Not only does logging remove trees before they've had time to set seed, the disturbance also forces Persoonia to sprout in big flushes earlier than natural. And those flushes might look positive at first, but they actually drain the seed bank, leaving fewer seeds for the future. Over time, this puts the population at real risk. But it doesn't stop there. Climate change is making fires hotter and happen more often. Intense fires can wipe out the seed bank, while more frequent fires shorten the window that Persoonia needs to mature and produce seeds. If disturbances keep coming too fast, Persoonia may not keep up and could disappear from these forests altogether. And that is the true problem that Persoonia is facing today. So what now? Well, my results don't give all the answers, but they do offer a tool to help protect Persoonia. There's still plenty to discover, like what level of maturity is needed for their populations to thrive, right? Or questions about food production, like is the amount of fruit on a tree related to age? How viable are the seeds? Like what percentage of seeds actually become new plants? Or how big is the soil seed bank after a disturbance? More controlled studies could also show how Persoonia responds to fire and logging under different conditions, even to different fire regimes. These questions take time to answer, but the more we learn, the better chance Persoonia has of surviving in a changing world. And of course, I couldn't leave you without an Australian word for the day, so here goes. Your Australian word for the day is, of course, bogan. Bogan is like the Australian version of what a redneck is in America, right? It's an insult for an unintelligent and uncultured person. Although I think lately there's some nuance to it. I feel like there's a movement coming up where the meaning of the word is kind of changing, in a sense that it's more like a spectrum thing, rather than really a definition of a person. So, look at it this way: everyone does or says something stupid every once in a while. So, in that sense, everyone has a bit of bogan in them. And you know what? I'd have to agree. So, basically, bogan is also kind of a funny term of endearment, I think.